Chapter 10.
No, he didn't, Cottla. Yes, he did, Koko. I saw him. You know better than to make up stories. I'm not making stories. He went there. How could he have? There's no door. There was. Two young girls, sisters, sat crouched in front of the shrine high above Kakariko village. The old Sheikah shrine had always been there, as far as they were concerned. Koko, the eldest of the two, but still a mere child of 8, knew that the old shrine was important because of how Nana always came up here to clean it of the creeping vines that liked to climb its sides. She was observant like that. Her sister, Cottla, was only 5 and not nearly as observant. She did have a very good imagination, though. Cottla, we need to go back down. It's almost supper time and Papa won't be happy if we're late. Their father was known to the two girls as Papa, though the other townspeople in Kakariko village called him Dorian. Koko and Cottla's mother had died 2 years prior, though Cottla did not really understand that. Koko did, though, and regularly visited her mother's small grave marker. She did not tell Papa that she knew, though. He had tried very hard to keep them from understanding what had happened to their mother. Koko was observant, though. Koko! I want to see him come out! Cottla drew her name out in just the way that got on Koko's nerves. Cottla! He can't come out! There is no door! Yes, there is! The old shrine had changed in the last 2 weeks. It had sat there, on top of the cliff overlooking Kakariko village, black and imposing. For a long time there was only one way up to it, by way of a steep winding path that led up to the magic forest, or so Koko and Cottla called it because of the magical lady. Now, however, it had started glowing orange. Actually, it had changed again, as the light around its base was blue while the Sheikah eye up top was still orange. Still, though, there was no way that Cottla was right about Link going into the shrine. After all, there were no doors, even if it did look like there should be a doorway. Cottla had probably made it up. Maybe she fell asleep and dreamt it. Sometimes when they fell asleep in or near the magic forest, they had weird dreams of a lady with long blonde hair and a sparkly necklace who played with them. Maybe this was just like that. Finally, feeling agitated with her little sister, Koko grabbed Cottla's hand tightly in her own, beginning to tug her towards the path that led back down to the village so that they could go home. Cottla struggled, but Koko was bigger and stronger than she was, so she held on tightly. Suddenly there was a flash of blue light from behind them, and she quickly turned around, eyes wide, as little blue specks swirled around the circle at the base of the shrine, which now also shone with bright blue light. The blue specks spiraled faster before coming together, taking shape and fading. In their place, Link stood. His shoulders were slumped and he looked sad, just like Papa looked some nights when he thought Koko was asleep. He wore a pretty blue tunic, though it was coated with gray dust. His cheek had a scrape on it that had been smeared with blood. Link turned to look up at the shrine, which, to Koko's surprise, had now turned all blue, the Sheikah eye included. She didn't know what that meant, but Link apparently did, as she saw him nod and turn. His eyes fell on Koko and Cottla, and he froze, eyes widening. Mr. Link! Koko couldn't understand how Link had arrived or where he had come from. Could Cottla have actually been telling the truth? Were you in the shrine? He stared at Koko before his posture suddenly changed. He stood up straighter, taking a deep breath and smiling before approaching and kneeling on the dirt in front of them. Koko wondered if that scrape on his cheek hurt. It looked as though it must. I was in there. I had to get some things done, and Lady Impa told me I could go. He hesitated, looking between Koko and Cottla. Finally, he brought a finger to his lips. But, shh, it's a secret. Koko nodded, happy to participate in a secret. At least this one was a good secret. Of course, Cottla wouldn't keep the secret at all. She was not very good at it. She would probably tell everyone in the village before the day was up. Koko would try to rein her in, though. Link smiled warmly at the sisters and then held up one hand, standing up. He hurried over to a tree growing at the edge of the cliff where he knelt down and picked something up. A moment later, he approached them again, holding a pair of little yellow flowers. "Here," he said, kneeling back in front of the girls. He held the flowers out to them, one in each hand. "I saw these and thought that you two might like them." Naturally, the girls, being only 8 and 5, were more than delighted to take the little yellow flowers. Koko stuck hers in her hair while Cottla just held hers tightly in her fist. She'd probably ruin it. A few moments later, after Link bade them farewell, Koko gave him her best Sheikah bow. She had been practicing in front of her mirror lately, and led her sister down the path, leaving him behind on top of the cliff.
Curse the ancient Sheikah, thought Link, as he sat down against the base of the newly activated Sheikah shrine. He reached up and touched his cheek, wincing at the flare of pain. If I didn't know better, I think they wanted to kill me. The shrine had focused on utilizing the remote bomb rune, with several sections of wall and doors that he had used the bombs to blast through. It had felt strange, destroying parts of the ancient Sheikah shrine, and he found himself wondering at the wisdom of the ancient Sheikah in making a shrine that existed purely to be partially destroyed. At least, he sincerely hoped that was how they meant for him to progress. He hadn't seen any other ways to do so. It hadn't been quite as challenging as the first shrine, but he learned very quickly how far back he needed to stand when blowing up sections of rock. The explosive blast sent out pieces of shrapnel surprisingly far, as evidenced by his bloodied cheek and several bruises hidden underneath his clothing. He wore the Sky Blue Champion's tunic, which proved to be an advantageous decision, if not one he was particularly comfortable with. It fit well, almost as if Impa had taken his measurements before having it tailored, and allowed him better freedom of movement than the tunic and armor pieces provided to him by Telma. Ultimately, he had decided to wear it, not for its protective value or greater flexibility, but because some of the members of the Sheikah tribe would still know what the tunic stood for. It would give them hope, and he felt that was the least of what his duty should be, even if it was just a false hope. Sighing softly, he stood, stretching and wincing at the sharp pain in his knee, brought about not by the flying shrapnel, but because he had tripped and fallen onto it. He would perhaps take Impa up on her offer to have a hot bath drawn for him. He had refused that morning, based purely on the fact that the old woman seemed to be offering it to Link for the express purpose of embarrassing Paya. The younger Sheikah seemed to be very bothered by the thought of him spending time in their bathing chamber. Now, however, it sounded wonderful. He would remain in Kakariko village one more night, and hopefully depart the next morning for Zora's domain, which Impa had marked on his map as being to the north. As he prepared to walk down the path, something out of the corner of his eye drew his attention, and he glanced toward the forest overlooking the shrine. Walking up the hill, he entered the forest, surprised to find it quite dark. The canopy overhead was thick, blocking out much of the sunlight. The darkness was not the only strange aspect about the forest either. It had a particular feel to it. It was too quiet, and the air felt heavier. As he walked further in, he noticed something else odd. There were no twigs or leaves on the ground. Thick green grass covered everything, growing shockingly well, regardless of the perpetual shadow created by the canopy of trees. Flowers of every type, shape, and color grew along the grass. The hair on his arm stood up as he ventured deeper into the shadowy woods. Nothing seemed disturbed in this place. The grass even seemed to resist his own footprints somehow, springing back up with alacrity after he removed a foot. He did see some animals, however. A large brown squirrel sat on a branch, watching him, and in the distance, through the trees, he could see a buck with massive antlers grazing. The forest seemed frozen in time, alive and without decay, ethereal. Another flash of blue caught his eye, and he tore his eyes from that of the buck's, which had stopped grazing to watch him. His eyes settled on a spot on the path before him. Standing several paces away was a creature of the likes Link had never seen. It was roughly the size and shape of a large hare, with large hindquarters and a smaller pair of front legs. Its face, however, was anything but rabbit-like. Instead, it appeared to have the head of an owl, with shining yellow eyes and a small rounded beak. Atop its head were what looked like two fern fronds, sticking up much like a rabbit's ears would have. Its entire body shone with a bright, otherworldly blue glow, lighting the grass around it. Amazed at the strange animal, he crouched slowly, his eyes never shifting. The creature's eyes had no pupils, yet Link thought its eyes were locked onto his own. One of its ears twitched in a way that seemed to imply curiosity, and it tilted its head to the side slightly. After several moments of silence, it hopped forward a few feet. Link's eyes widened slightly, and he cautiously reached one of his hands out towards the creature. The creature considered his hand, tilting its head, and Link held his breath. Finally, the blue creature took a few more tentative steps and extended its face toward him. Link felt its beak touch his fingertip. An electric shock ran up his arm, and he gasped sharply, his entire body tingling with energy. The blue creature pulled back, looking up at him with wide eyes. Those eyes seemed to see into Link, and he imagined that he could see his own shocked expression reflected back at him in their depths. They remained like this for a time, gazes locked, while the strange energy that Link felt dissipated. As it faded, he found himself wanting to experience the strange feeling again, and he hesitantly reached his hand forward again. This time, however, the blue creature did not reach out and touch him. At his movement, it pulled back, looking at his hand. He could have sworn that it even shook its head very slightly. Then, startling him with its suddenness, it turned and darted away into the brush. The blue light winked out, and the forest, which had seemed so bright in the creature's presence, grew dark once more. Link waited for the creature to reappear. It had run into the bush, but surely it would come out, glowing brightly and bathing the forest in its soothing light again. But it soon became apparent to him that whatever the creature had been, it would not be reappearing. Its light had disappeared completely, and the bush didn't so much as quiver. He stood on shaky legs, looking around the dark forest. It had grown still. He could no longer see the buck or the squirrel from earlier. The strange heaviness about in the air remained, however, and he decided that his curiosity had been sated for the time being. As he walked back out, he did not notice that his knee no longer ached. It would not be until later that evening, as he prepared for the hot bath that he requested from Impa, that he would notice that, underneath the dried blood, his cheek was whole and unblemished. When he did notice these strange things later that evening, his mind was drawn back to the curious blue rabbit-like creature and the energy he felt at its touch. What sort of animal could heal with a touch and disappear into thin air? He never asked Impa, however. He wasn't sure why, but it felt too personal. The next morning, he departed Kakariko village just before dawn. Though many of the villagers were still asleep or about their chores, some had gathered to see him off, holding torches aloft to light his path out of the village. Like the day before, he wore his blue tunic, which he had cleaned of dust and debris from the shrine's challenges the day prior. He wore his sword and Sheikah's shield upon his back, for good measure. He could provide hope. He rode out through an alternate path that took him through another, narrower pass that led out onto the high ground overlooking what Impa had called the Lanayru wetlands. This route was much shorter than the route that Telma had taken to get to Zora's domain. She had traveled back out and around the dueling peaks before turning north. However, it was also one that would have been impossible for her to take with her cart, due to the lack of any consistent road once out of the pass, and the at times steep decline that led down before finally reaching the distant road. As Link rode out of the pass, his eyes were once again drawn to the distant Hyrule castle. He was quite a bit closer to it than he had been before, and he could make out certain details better now. a series of massive pillars that looked distantly Sheikah in nature jutted out of the ground surrounding the castle. They appeared to be as tall as the castle's tallest towers, and glowed with a strange reddish light, rather than the typical blue or orange. To Link's reckoning, it appeared there were 5 of them surrounding the castle and town ruins at the base of the castle. He sat atop Spirit, rigid, eyes fixed on the distant castle. Would he see the great beast rise up once again? If Ganon did show itself again, would it sink back down within the castle, as before? Or would it finally break free of Princess Zelda's grasp? How much longer could Zelda contain Calamity Ganon? Would Link, despite his best efforts, be too late to change anything? Had he been resurrected just to watch the land fall again? He grimaced, looking away from the castle, ashamed of his thoughts. Thankfully, as he carefully rode Spirit down the incline to where he could get back to the distant road, Ganon did not rise above the castle. It would seem the princess was still doing her duty. The least Link could do was his. The sun had dipped below the western horizon by the time Link reached the wetland stable. The first detail that struck him as he approached the squat building was that its proximity to Hyrule Field and the castle had clearly governed how this traveler's way station had been built up over time. Situated on a hill overlooking a south-flowing river that ran between the Lanayru wetlands and the Hyrule Field, the wetland stable had been clearly built with its defense in mind. The forests around the stable had been cleared of trees, and much of the wood had been used to form walls of sharpened pickets that surrounded the stable. Furthermore, 2 watchtowers had been built, one each to the north and south, and Link could see a guard in each one, armed with bows. There were several buildings in addition to the stable, but the closest was shaped like a long rectangle. From this building, he saw a man wearing leather armor and wielding a spear walk out. Perhaps a barracks of sorts. The stable, however, appeared much like the other stable he had seen, albeit somewhat larger, and with an area in its yard devoted to wagons and carts. As Link approached, he noted a patch of burnt grass just inside the picketed perimeter, and several broken arrows sticking out of the ground just outside of the perimeter. Not only was this way station prepared for battle, but it had also seen it, and recently. He felt an odd mixture of apprehension and happiness to see others fighting back. He expected to be stopped by the guards in the towers, but no one said anything as he maneuvered Spirit into the yard. Now that he was closer to the stable, he could hear the sounds of music and singing coming from the inside of the stable, which had the immediate effect of lifting his spirits. He dismounted, handing Spirit's reins to the stable boy, and walked toward the stable's entrance. Once he entered, he was greeted with a sight that was both delightful and slightly confusing. The large common room had quite a few tables set up in rows, and many of the benches were lined with men and women in leather armor, as well as a smaller number of people that looked to be travelers or merchants. Several servers weaved between the tables, carrying drinks or platters of food. The people in the common room seemed happy, talking amongst themselves, laughing or singing. The reason was this for clear, as Link's eyes swept the common room. In the back of the room, on a platform made of a large wooden box, stood one of the members of the Rito race. The Rito was tall, significantly taller than Link, and broader of chest and shoulder, with blue and white plumage and a large black beak. He eagerly played an instrument like an accordion, while singing along with a deep, resonant voice. He clearly enjoyed playing. Though his beak was rigid, something about his eyes and other facial muscles gave the impression of a broad smile. As Link crossed the room to a table to listen and hopefully order a meal, the Rito's eyes fell on him. For the briefest of moments, the Rito's music faltered. His golden eyes met Link's blue, sharp and focused, but then closed. The music continued. If the other patients had even noticed, they said nothing. Link hesitated before sitting down on a bench, however. Something about that expression gave him the impression of recognition. Finally, he pushed such thoughts from his mind as paranoia and sat. Several minutes later, the Rito ended his song with a smattering of applause from the gathered patrons. He smiled and gave a slight bow before his eyes roamed over the gathered people. A few of the drunker patrons began to shout out song requests, but the Rito simply raised one feathered hand while precariously balancing his accordion with the other, his eyes again falling on Link, who had just ordered his meal. Friends, friends. The Rito lowered his hand to his accordion and played a long, sweet note. There will be more time for requests, I assure you. After all, the night is young yet. But first, I feel inspired to play a song that has been handed down since ancient times. It is a song of heroes and villains, courage and magic, and a great victory. It is a true story, though one from long ago. The crowd responded positively, which caused the reader to smile and begin to sway slightly as he played additional notes on his accordion, slow and methodical. The kingdom of Hyrule is a vast and storied land, oft grasped in the palm of a villainous hand. A dark force of destruction many times undone rises once again, Ganon, the calamitous one. But hope survives in Hyrule, for all is not lost, 2 brave souls protect it no matter the cost. A goddess blood princess and a fearless knight. They appear in each age to fight the good fight. Their battle with Ganon committed to song, to keep it through time, no matter how long. Now begins the second verse. Listen and you'll know of their battle with Ganon 10,000 years ago. The kingdom of Hyrule was once a land of lasting peace, a culture of such strength and wit that suffering did cease. But Ganon lurked beneath the surface, strengthening its jaws, so the ancient people of Hyrule set out to help the cause. Their efforts bore fruit in an automated force to help avert calamity by sealing it at its source. 4 giant behemoths for which power never ceased, each of these titans was called the Divine Beast. And free-willed machines that hunted down their prey, these guardians were built to last, so they could join the fray. To guide the beasts in battle, warriors were needed, so 4 champions were pledged to see Ganon defeated. Divine beasts, champions, princess, and knight, their plan to rout Ganon with all of their might. And when Calamity Ganon reared its head, Hyrule rose against it. The optimism of Hyrule all the more incensed it. Ganon raged in its assault, boiling with hate. It gnashed its teeth and thrashed about, but it was all too late. The Guardians kept the heroes safe through every hour. The Divine Beasts unleashed attacks that weakened Ganon's power. The hero with the sealing sword struck the final blow, and the holy power of the princess sealed Ganon so. And that is the story of the brazen attack on Calamity Ganon 10,000 years back. The Rito stopped singing, playing his slow, somber tune for several additional seconds, before finishing with one final long note. For a long time, silence reigned in the common room. The silence was eventually broken by one man, whose words slurred with drunkenness.
Hey, Kass! I thought you said that was a true story.
The Rito, named Kass, turned to the man and smiled, nodding his head in acknowledgement. I did.
Why in the gods' names is the castle standing destroyed? Why do I have to fight off monsters every other day?
Kass' smile faltered slightly, but inclined his head in acknowledgement. This song, of course, spoke of the ancient hero and princess from 10,000 years past, who achieved victory against the Calamity Ganon. These were not the same individuals that fought against Ganon 100 years ago, before the Age of Burning Fields. Obviously, a woman near spoke this time, and several others muttered agreement with her. Link felt his heart sink even further. Friends, Kass said, holding up one more calming hand. The story from 100 years ago is another tale indeed, and not one that I am prepared to tell this evening. However, in the defense of the princess and her knight, the Calamity Ganon has been subdued, at least for a time. The woman beside Link snorted derisively. And a good lot that has done us. You can't walk 100 feet into Hyrule Field without being ambushed by monsters or worse. No princess, no hero, and that creature hovering the castle. My daughter keeps having nightmares about it. The only reason I don't take her and go is because I don't think there's any place that will be safe when it does come for us. Link abruptly stood from the table, causing a handful of people to glance at him, Kass included. He ignored them and stepped outside of the stable, taking in a deep, shaky breath of cool night air. It had gotten dark, and the stars twinkled in the night sky. He leaned against the outer wall of the stable, wishing he could just melt into it and disappear. He wondered if, perhaps, he could just use the Sheikah Slate to teleport back to Kakariko Village, or even Hateno. Or gods, maybe the damned Great Plateau. Perhaps another 100-year slumber would do him some good. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, trying not to think of his lost memories, his failure, or his shame, and of course, thinking of all of these things in turn. He heard soft footsteps approaching, and with a sigh opened his eyes, thinking it to be a server there to collect a payment. With some surprise, he found Kass standing beside him. "Good evening." Kass bowed his head in greeting, which Link returned, hoping that might be the end of it. It wasn't, and the radio continued speaking. "You are an unfamiliar face to me. I tend to pride myself in knowing most of the travelers in this region of the country. They tend to have some of the best stories, you see." Link considered his words carefully, having learned his lessons about poorly thought-out lies. He knew some things a little better now, at least. "I'm from Hateno Village. Have you been there?" Kass tilted his head slightly. "Hateno? No. I must confess that my travels have not yet taken me that far east, though I hope to do so soon." Link relaxed and allowed himself a small smile. It's a nice village. Home. He reflected as he spoke that he hadn't yet told a lie. He was from Hateno Village, just the Hateno of 100 years prior. "If you do not mind me asking, what brings you so far west and north?" Kass had a very refined way of speaking with a deep voice that Link had frankly not expected from a race of avian people. What had he expected, though? Squawks? "I'm traveling to..." He hesitated for just a moment before deciding the truth would serve him just fine in this case. "Zora's domain." Kass' eyes widened, and he smiled. "To Zora's domain, you say? What a wonderful coincidence. I too have begun a trek to Zora's domain. I've heard of some troubles with the ancient divine beast there, and I wish to see it for myself." Link's heart sank. This seemed to be quite an unfair turn of events. "You are investigating the divine beast?" "Oh, you know of the divine beasts, then. Wonderful. Many people that I have spoken to from your region are not particularly aware of such things. 100 years is not quite enough time for their existence to fall into legend, but some are simply unaware of their veracity. In fact, many children I speak to..." "Oh." Kass appeared embarrassed, the feathers around his neck puffing out slightly. "Forgive me. I do not mean to compare you to a child." Link shook his head to indicate no offense taken, after which Kass looked relieved. He smiled. "I merely meant that, unless you live in the shadow of one such creation, it is easy to dismiss them as fables or exaggerations. We Rito, naturally, have lived within a short flight of Vah Meadow for the last 100 years, so their truth is not lost on us." Vah Meadow, the divine beast piloted by the Rito, Revali. A champion that perished at Ganon's rise. The facts played through Link's mind like a mantra. He had done his best to commit these things to memory since leaving Kakariko Village. He may not remember them, but he could at least know of them. "But of course you asked me a question, did you not? You asked me if I was investigating the divine beast, Varuta. That is not my intent exactly, no. You see, I am a traveling minstrel, as I am sure you may have guessed. I once studied under the renowned Sheikah poet, Ro, who was the court poet for the royal family before their fall 100 years ago." Kass turned, glancing toward the distant castle. The red haze shone around the castle, lightly illuminating its lower sections. Thankfully, no beast rose up over it. "He long wrote and sung of the time and heroes from before the calamity, you see. Specifically of the Princess Zelda, her knight, and the 4 champions that fought to prevent Ganon's rise." Oh, that is just fantastic, Link thought. Of all the people he could encounter by chance, it had to be a traveling Rito with intimate knowledge of the past. Is that so? and I am continuing my late master's life work in my travels. I am traveling to Zora's domain now with the hopes that I might discover more of Mipha, the Zora champion, in order to continue my master's epic, which he left tragically unfinished when he perished many years ago. Link hid a grimace, looking at the grass by their feet while considering Kass's words. Absently, he wondered how this kept happening to him. He supposed that it shouldn't have been too surprising. 100 years wasn't so long ago that his failures would be forgotten, even if most of those alive today did not know his identity. Is everything all right? Kass looked at him curiously, and he felt his face flush. You look concerned. Oh, he faltered. It's just sad what happened to her and the other champions. Laredo nodded sagely. Yes, indeed. A true tragedy. Such hopes were placed upon the six, and for it all to end so direly. Silence fell between them for a time before Kass continued. Of course, I do not fully believe that all hope is lost. Link looked up at Kass, eyebrows raised. When Kass saw his expression, he chuckled softly. Well, perhaps it is my tendency to prefer stories with a happier ending, but I believe that things work themselves out more often than not. But they lost. Did they? They all died. Did they? Link's voice caught, and he stared up at Kass's golden eyes. Those golden eyes seemed too knowing to him. Finally, Laredo smiled and shrugged his feathery shoulders. Of course, the six are no longer with us. Certainly the 4 champions perished in the battle. The night legends tell fell at the princess's feet in the shadow of Fort Hateno. The princess, however, he looked toward the castle. My master spoke of her and how she went alone to the castle and faced Calamity Ganon with her sealing powers. And here we are, alive so many years later. What about what that woman said? The monsters aren't terrorizing travelers. From what I've seen, few even venture west of the Dueling Peaks. Kass nodded in acknowledgement. What you speak of is true. But I would suggest that the proliferation of monsters along our roads is not the fault of the six. When Link opened his mouth to object, Kass held up a hand. Please, let me explain. From what I've heard, it is true that the monsters have gained strength since Ganon's re-emergence, but they existed prior to its rise, and will likely continue to exist if it is defeated. Before the fall of Hyrule, the king did not rely on Princess Zelda to patrol the roads for moblins, however. That duty was left to common soldiers. Now, of course, we lost much of the organized military in Ganon's attack, but you cannot tell me that others could not rise up to fight back. But if all the soldiers and knights died, Link said, but Kass had apparently not finished. You look as if you are a warrior. I would hazard a guess that you have indeed fought some of these creatures, have you not? Link nodded reluctantly, and Kass smiled in triumph. See? If we simply had more individuals like you, perhaps we could secure these roads once again. All of the races have warriors. The Sheikah are still renowned for their abilities in stealth and precisions. Goron are capable of repelling entire groups of enemies alone. The Zora are swift and still have standing military force. The Garuda are an entire race of warriors, and we Rito are known to be the finest archers in the land. You Hylians, of course, have a history full of great and noble warriors. So what excuse do we have? The Great Calamity was disastrous, yes, but it was also 100 years ago. However, instead of reclaiming the sections of our land that had once been lost to Ganon's minions, we instead appear to be waiting to die, or perhaps to be rescued. Link remained silent, eyes focused on the distant castle. He didn't know how to respond to all of that. He wanted to take hope in what he said, to be able to pass some of the blame for the nation's state on to the others. But how could he? This would have never happened, were it not for his failure. Kass did, eventually, break the silence with a softer tone. I apologize if I caused any offense. I did not mean to imply that individuals such as you should be doing more. Only that we, the various peoples of Hyrule, should be working together, rather than taking refuge in our homes. Link shook his head, exhaling slowly. He still wasn't sure what he could say, so he chose to say nothing. It also occurs to me that I never asked your name. That seems inexcusably rude on my part, so please, you know my name, might I know yours? Link. Link. Kass's tone was curious. Link's blood ran cold, and he inwardly cursed himself. Why would he have used his real name when talking to this person, who clearly knew much of the past? It is fascinating, then, that you wear that tunic. Is it? He tried to keep his voice carefully even, but he still refused to meet Kass's eyes. He did not want to see that knowing expression. It appears to be the same color worn by the champions of old, based on what I have been told. And Link was the name of the princess's knight, and wielder of the Master Sword. I didn't know that. Link forced himself to meet Kass's gaze and smile, in what he hoped was an innocent fashion. Yes, well, such details are often lost to time. The hero's name especially often appears to change in stories and myths, depending on the person telling the story. Some even mistakenly call him by the princess's name, as silly as that might sound. Kass chuckled softly. But my master actually knew the man, and he informed me that his name was Link. Just like you. That is strange. Link broke eye contact, gazing out toward the castle once more. Sometime later, Kass cleared his throat. It is clear that these subjects give you pause. I apologize for any discomfort caused by my musings. Link sighed and looked over at Kass, shaking his head. No, it's just... I have a lot on my mind. It isn't your fault. Again, the Rito gave him that piercing stare. Then perhaps I can suggest you try the Vault Fruit Ale? I have heard from many patrons that it does wonders. It tends to do wonders for my purse as well. Link laughed softly as he pieced together the Rito's meaning. Kass opened his beak in what was clearly a grin. The joke finally allowed Link's shoulders to relax again, and he turned away from the sight of the dark castle. The rest of the night passed much easier for him than it had begun. They eventually went back inside, and he enjoyed listening to Kass's music and storytelling, none of which featured him or his previous incarnation.